Hello again everyone, it's me, Madame Macabre, and welcome to a new video. So for today's video, I'm actually going to be trying something new. I have been getting for quite some time now a lot of requests from various people asking for either advice on how to write a better story, or if I had tips for them, or various things, just all in relation to how to write better scary stories. And I haven't really had the time to sit down and go through lots of different stories with people and individually respond to all this, because that takes a lot of time, especially when it's a broad umbrella question like that covers so very many different things. So I decided I would do a short series on this channel where I try to break down from my understanding and my education how to better write horror. Now to clarify, I don't have a special degree in this or anything, and I obviously don't do this professionally, but in my day I've written and gotten published on various websites my own scary stories, and as you can imagine, I have read quite my fair share. So from my collected knowledge over time, I feel like I've got a pretty good grasp on what it takes to make a satisfying scary story. And for our first topic in Horror Writing 101, I thought it would be good to cover a big one, and that is establishing your universe. This may seem like it's something that is very common knowledge, but there are actually far more stories out there than there should be, with just no direction, no set rules, things are just all over the place, it breaks suspension of disbelief, and it's a mess, and then they can't figure out why their story's falling apart or not being received very well, and the problem may be not necessarily related to the characters or, their idea, but it's simply because they did not set it up in a proper fashion, and it just unravels by the time you get to the end. Now, if you talk to anybody who's super into writing, whether it be books or screenplays or what have you, they're going to tell you that you want to establish the rules of your universe within the first act. I'm sure most of us have already encountered, whether it be a TV show that didn't tick off very well that we saw, or a book we read and we didn't like, where it's like everything's going fine, you like it, and then all of a sudden, 3/4 into the book nearing the end, something totally out of place pops up and it falls apart and it ruins it for you. Like, for example, in horror, say you've established the rules of the universe, it's a very realistic universe like ours, there's been no mention of monsters, aliens, anything. The threat is another human being and they're coming for you. Okay, you've got the whole story set up, you're reaching the climax of the story, it's getting all scary, then all of a sudden, boom, a demon monster pops out, an alien pops out. It just kind of pulls you right out of the story. It's got no place being there, and everything just falls apart. I get that with horror in particular, twists are definitely a thing. However, once again, in the first 2 acts, you should be setting it up with foreshadowing, so it doesn't just, once again, come from nowhere in the final act and just pull everybody right out of the story. Setting up universes in horror stories can be interesting because they've got this very unique thing in which you can make them seem like it is a very, very real world just like ours, but also include very imaginative elements. You can throw in monsters and aliens and clandestine powers, and people will just accept it if you set it up. People are very accepting of all the paranormal goodies so long as you make sure they follow the rules of your universe. So, right from the get-go, figure out exactly what kind of universe you want to set it in. Is it something fantastical where all the stuff is totally not out of place? Well then, set that right up from the beginning. Or if you want to include these things in a real-world setting, just make sure to set yourself up for success. Also, sorry if I sound off in this video, I caught the con plague at SakuraCon, so that's a thing. So now that we have the major world-building setup covered, we're going to move on to another thing that oftentimes... Hi, Artemis. We're gonna move on to something that absolutely drives me crazy, and if I run into this, boom, it's over for me. I'm done with the story. I am completely pulled out. My suspension of disbelief is gone. And that is when people who want to include scientific or medical things, but they don't do any research and they completely screw it up and it is so unrealistic. You want there to be a cool chemical reaction that burns somebody? make sure those chemicals actually do have that reaction and it actually is possible to get burned to a certain degree. Or if someone gets infected with something, make sure that the symptoms that they're going to start getting are actual symptoms, because for maybe the majority of readers won't be educated on the topic and it won't bother them, but I guarantee you're going to run into people who do know about the topic, and the fact that you got it wrong is going to it'll kill the story. Whether it be chemical things, medical things, feats that normal teenagers should not be able to do physically, just do a little bit of research, because if you're trying to write a story in a realistic world, in a realistic sense, and you have all this nonsensical make-believe stuff, it will just make the whole thing seem unprofessional and you will get flack for it. Seriously, guys, research is your best friend. I guarantee you, if you do a little bit of research on the topics you're trying to delve into, your work will increase in quality by so much. It is a good habit to get yourself into doing if you want to keep up writing. Jumping back to a specific example, I think everybody knows what I was hinting at with some of those is, for instance, Jeff the killer getting burned and his skin turning white and his hair turning black. The only way to have your skin turn bone white like that is to, I believe, get 5th degree burns, which is, it's really difficult to get burned that badly. The fire needs to get incredibly hot and it needs to be on you for a long time. And just from the setup of the story, I don't think it would be possible for him to get those kind of burns. And if he did, I think they would have written that in if they'd done the research. And if he had 5th degree burns, no hair, nothing. And he certainly wouldn't be just like porcelain smooth white. He'd be looking like Freddy Krueger's little brother. I'm sorry. But yeah, that's what I mean. Just do a little bit of research beforehand, and I guarantee you your story's gonna be received so much better. Alright, this one is a major problem with creepypastas, in specific with horror writing. Can we please stop using mental illness as a segue for teenagers to magically transform into demonic killers? Not only is that incredibly offensive to people who actually live with mental illness, but as somebody who knows and is close with many people with various different mental illnesses, I can assure you that never once has having a mental break caused them to gain superhuman abilities and powers from beyond. And they certainly didn't magically gain the ability to wield a weapon that they previously had no experience with, like somebody who has mastered the art for years. I'm beginning to suspect that many people who use this writing setup don't actually understand how mental illness works. I'm looking at you, Jeff the Killer clone OCs. Okay, so you're reading a story and it's pretty good up until, oh, here it comes. The main character, who is this young teenage, usually 14 to 17 age range, they have a breakdown, then all of a sudden they get this magic imbued sword that they can wield masterfully. Okay, first of all, friend, do you have any idea how heavy a sword actually is? A real one. Because you just spent like 4 paragraphs earlier in the story talking about how small and weak and fragile and easily bullied this character is, and now suddenly they're wielding this friggin' heavy instrument of destruction like they just packed in a whole bunch of arm days, bro. And I just said sword as an example, but this is the case with so many other unorthodox weapons. Like, why does this random family in the suburbs have a scythe? And scythes are not something that are easy to fight with, unless it's a battle scythe, and that's even less likely to have in possession of a family in the suburbs. And even if you somehow had an actual battle scythe that wasn't old and rusty and dull from years in storage or whatever, those take years to learn to use and they're heavy too. You're gonna be swinging that thing around like the Star Wars kid and you're gonna get knocked on your butt. That's what's gonna happen. You're gonna go charging in to try and hit them and they're gonna push you into a bush. And I mean, anything. Any type of weapon is going to take time to learn to master, so some random kid who has never lived a life that required them to have combat skills, they're just going to be clumsy. They're not going to know what they do, but these kids are written to be like friggin' army veterans who are out there in the Green Berets, like crawling through the mud and just like combat experts. And it's like, how? That's the first time you picked that thing up. Why are you suddenly doing all this ninja magic? No. I'm sorry, but your 13-year-old butt isn't gonna be nearly as deadly as you think you are, swinging around an old fire axe with zero combat training. Sure, it's totally possible for these characters to already have skills with said weapons, but you have to establish that in the story beforehand. Again, first 2 acts, you need to get that stuff done so it's not just whammo in the last one and makes no sense. You want your character to be able to wield a chainsaw? Well, okay, how heavy do you think a chainsaw is? How do you start it? Have you started one before? How do you hold it to inflict maximum damage? Because there is a better way to do these things. Why would your character know that if they've never done it before? Okay, maybe their family lives out in the woods, and from a young age, their parents were kind of neglectful, so they had no problem with their kid using the chainsaw. They made him go out and, cut the wood and all that stuff, and since they've been dinking around with it for years, they're pretty well handled with a chainsaw, so when they finally need to use it to fight, okay, I buy it. I buy that you know what you're doing with a chainsaw. All because you established that they can do that, and you're not just dropping it on us out of the blue. Because I'm sorry, but the first time I handled a chainsaw, I had no idea what I was doing because I kind of just stayed away from them up until that point, to where when I was like, okay, how do? I'm so tired of 12.9-year-olds being masters of deadly combat. And I do realize that a lot of the last points that I covered are definitely more specific to creepypasta writers than it is horror in general, but I think a lot of the concepts that I talked about can be applied to any writing, really. So I'll go ahead and still call it horror writing rather than just creepypasta. But yeah, I hope this video was somewhat helpful for you guys. I hope it covered a lot of points that you might have been curious about, or maybe it revealed something to you that you were doing and now you're like, this is why I keep getting negative reactions to my stories. I don't mean to attack anybody with this. I am not pointing out anybody in particular. I didn't even have any specific stories in mind when I was ragging on all this stuff. These are just very common tropes I have seen in a lot of stories, and especially in some story types that I've had sent to me, and this is honestly the best I can do to help you diagnose your problems before we really have to dig in. And in future videos, I will be going into more specific topics, such as how I believe you can better write a good character, or better write a good monster, or, various things that are more specific if you're wanting specific help. This is just sort of to dip our toe into the water with the broadest umbrella thing, and that is just, these are major plot point things that will kill your story right off the bat. So if you're doing some of these things, work on fixing it, and I guarantee you your story's gonna be eons better than it was before. And if you're not doing any of this stuff, you're on the right track, but if you're still having trouble, well, maybe one of the next episodes will help you diagnose it. Anyway, I hope you guys have enjoyed this video. I have rambled on long enough, so I will go ahead and call it quits for now. I will catch you all next time. That's all for now. Bye-bye.